I'm Fenora Langridge, and the moment that shattered me began with a phone call I'll never forget. My sister, a commercial pilot, whispered from the cockpit, "Fenora, your husband is on my flight to Paris, business class, with another woman." But my husband was sitting right in front of me in our living room, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. That was the day my marriage cracked open, and I realized the man I shared my life with wasn't who I thought he was. The phone pressed against my ear crackled with static. My sister's voice hushed and urgent. "Fenora, are you absolutely sure Graham is at home right now?" I froze, my eyes fixed on the man sitting in our living room. Graham lounged in his usual spot, legs crossed, sipping coffee from the chipped mug I'd bought him as a joke last year. "World's okayest husband," stamped in bold black letters. He looked the same as always, calm, composed, hidden behind the pages of the Financial Times. "Of course he's here," I whispered back. "I can see him from the kitchen." Marjorie's voice dropped even lower, the tone I'd only heard in emergencies. "That's impossible. I'm looking at him right now. Seat 2A, business class, headed to Paris. And Fenora, he's not alone. There's a blonde woman sitting beside him." My stomach hollowed out. The room tilted as though the floor had given way. I gripped the counter, staring at Graham, the slope of his shoulders, the way he tapped his fingers on the armrest, the faint smile that once meant comfort but now carved fear through me. It didn't make sense. He was here, in our apartment, reading the morning paper as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Yet my sister, 1,000 miles away at the helm of a jet, swore she was watching the same man board her flight with another woman. 2 Grahams, 2 lives, one truth about to split mine open. I said nothing to Graham. When he looked up from his paper and asked, "Who was that on the phone?" I forced a nod, swallowed hard, and mumbled something vague. My throat felt dry, but I kept my face steady. From that morning on, I started paying attention. The credit card statements were the first crack in the facade. $500 dinners for 2 on nights he'd told me he was grabbing a quick bite at the office. A faint trace of amber perfume lingered on one of his shirts, a scent I didn't own and couldn't place. And then there was the strangeness of him himself. Too perfect. He locked the door without fail, never left socks on the floor, never raised his voice. All the little imperfections that used to irritate me had vanished. Instead of comforting me, their absence made my skin prickle. I called Selena Brooks, my closest friend since college, and now an investigative journalist. She agreed to help, and within a day, she had the building's surveillance footage in her hands. When we looked closely, the seams showed. The clip of Graham walking through the lobby had been altered, his shadow tilted in the wrong direction, flickering unnaturally under the lights. The realization sank like ice through my veins. Someone had used technology to manipulate the images. Whoever was sitting across the living room from me might not be Graham at all, but a carefully crafted illusion. The confirmation came in the most ordinary way. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Keller, stopped me in the hallway one afternoon. With the ease of someone who remembered every detail, she told me she'd seen Graham hauling a suitcase out of the elevator the previous weekend. He had even paused to wish her a pleasant trip. But when I checked the archived security footage from that same night, the recording told a different story. Graham returning home empty-handed, walking casually into the apartment as though nothing unusual had happened. I stood in the kitchen replaying Marjorie's words, my pulse hammering. If cameras could be tampered with, if witnesses said one thing while footage showed another, then who exactly was the man I was living with? The thought lodged itself deep and immovable. The Graham sitting in my apartment might not be my husband at all. He looked like him, moved like him, smiled like him, but tiny cracks were beginning to show, and through those cracks, the truth was seeping in. I needed proof, not suspicions, not shadows or altered footage, something undeniable. One evening, I set a pot of water to boil and pulled scallops from the freezer. Linguine with scallops, a dish Graham could never touch. 3 times I had rushed him to the ER after accidental exposure. His allergy was violent, Immediate, unmistakable. I plated the dish, the buttery garlic scent filling the apartment, and placed it in front of him. He smiled as if nothing about this was unusual, twirled his fork through the pasta, and lifted a scallop to his mouth. I waited, my heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. He chewed, swallowed, smiled wider. "You've never made it this good before. No hives, no gasping for air, no frantic reach for the EpiPen he once carried everywhere. Just a man enjoying his dinner, blissfully unaware that his performance had cracked open. My hands shook as I set down my wine glass. Whatever else he was, this man sitting across from me was not my husband. That night, I lay awake listening to his even breathing, the steady rhythm of someone sleeping soundly. Graham had always struggled with insomnia, flipping through books until 2 a.m. This detail alone gnawed at me. When I was certain he was asleep, I slipped out of bed and reached for his leather briefcase. Inside, beneath the usual papers, I found what I wasn't meant to see. A union card stamped SAG-AFTRA, the name Mark Wheeler staring back at me. Beneath it, a stack of notes written like a script. My life catalogued in bullet points. Fenora calls her mother every Thursday, prefers peonies over roses, takes her coffee black with 1 sugar, page after page of my marriage reduced to stage directions. The last line stopped me cold. 3 months. Maintain the role until the transfer is complete. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't living with my husband. I was living with an actor rehearsing a role paid for by someone who wanted me blind. The next morning, Selena called with the piece that locked it all together. The cash payments to this Mark Wheeler trace back offshore, shell corporations tied to investment funds with a history of shady transfers. Fenora, this isn't just infidelity. It's something bigger, much bigger. I sank into my chair, the script still burning in my hand. What began as a suspicion of betrayal had just opened into a labyrinth of fraud, deception, and money that reached far beyond my marriage. The office was dark, except for the glow of my laptop. I typed with the precision of someone dissecting a corpse, each keystroke peeling back another layer of rot. The numbers told their story without hesitation. More than $2 million siphoned from our joint accounts, disguised as 100 separate transfers of $9,999s, just beneath the federal reporting threshold. The trail twisted across borders, bouncing from a shell company in the Caribbean to accounts in Cyprus, then vanishing into Luxembourg. But the detail that froze my blood wasn't the missing money. It was the access logs, files from my clients, confidential financial data I had sworn to protect, had been downloaded without authorization. If regulators ever traced it back, they would see my credentials, my signature, my responsibility. I wouldn't just lose my license. I could be prosecuted as the criminal. I pressed my palms against my temples, the weight of it crashing down. Graham hadn't only betrayed our marriage, he had gutted my career and left my name as the perfect cover for insider trading. The realization carved through me like ice. I wasn't just collateral damage. I was the scapegoat he had been grooming all along. Time was slipping through my fingers. I wrote a string of code, cloaking it inside a file labeled Q3 Investment Review. If anyone opened it from an international IP address, the program would lock down every linked account and trigger alerts straight to the FBI. It was my insurance policy, a fuse waiting to burn. That night, I turned to the man across the table, smiled as if I still believed the act. "We should do something special," I said lightly. "An anniversary party. 8 years deserves a celebration." He nodded without hesitation. But he didn't catch the lie. We'd only been married 7. My chest tightened with grim certainty. Mark had just fallen into my net. Later, Selena's voice came through my phone, hushed but sharp. "If you gather Graham's clients and colleagues, the FBI can act right in front of them. No more denials. No way out." Hours passed, the apartment heavy with silence. Mark poured himself drink after drink, shoulders slumping under the weight of secrets. Finally, he broke. "I've got 1 week left," he muttered, eyes glassy. "Then Graham disappears with all the money. He told me if it all blows up, I'll be the one in handcuffs. The glass trembled in my hand. He had admitted what I already feared. Graham had orchestrated everything, and Mark was nothing more than the sacrificial lamb. My pulse steadied. I no longer had the luxury of waiting. The so-called anniversary party wouldn't just be a facade. It would be the stage for the final act. And when the curtain rose, I would make sure the truth destroyed him. The apartment glittered as if it were dressed for a celebration. Candles lined the dining table, their light flickering against polished glassware and plates arranged with meticulous care. Guests filled the space with laughter and polite chatter. Graham's biggest clients, a handful of trusted colleagues, all drawn here by an invitation they couldn't refuse. They clinked champagne flutes, casting curious glances at the clock, wondering why a man like Graham would host such a gathering at such an odd hour. I hovered near Mark, who stood stiffly in Graham's tailored suit, from across the room. He looked convincing enough, sharp jawline, steady smile, polished shoes, but up close, I could see the beads of sweat forming along his hairline. The way his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. He was breaking under the weight of the role. I waited for the moment when the room had reached its peak hum of conversation, then tapped a glass with a spoon. Conversations ebbed into silence. All eyes turned toward me. I lifted my phone, pressed play, and let the sound fill the room. "Fenora!" Marjorie's voice carried from the tiny speaker, calm yet edged with urgency. "I'm looking at Graham right now. Seat 2A, business class, headed to Paris, and he's not alone." The words hung heavy in the air. The room stilled. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their gazes snapping toward Mark. His forced smile faltered. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hiss of candles burning low. Then came the pounding on the door, sharp, commanding, unmistakable. "FBI! Open up!" The guests gasped, confusion rippling through them. Mark froze, his knuckles whitening around the stem of his glass. I stepped back as the door swung open, 6 agents in dark suits sweeping into the apartment with precision. The lead agent held up her badge, her voice ringing clear. "We have a warrant. Aidan Graham Langridge, you are under arrest. Sir." The once celebratory atmosphere collapsed into chaos. Clients muttered in disbelief, some clutching their phones, others staring in stunned silence as the illusion they'd believed for months shattered right in front of them. My carefully staged anniversary party had transformed into a crime scene, and there was no going back. Across the ocean, the parallel unfolded in real time. My phone buzzed with a live feed from Marjorie. On her screen, Graham, the real Graham, was being dragged across the floor of Charles de Gaulle Airport, arms pinned behind his back, as French police tightened handcuffs around his wrists. His polished composure was gone, replaced by frantic resistance, his face twisted in rage. Beside him, the blonde woman collapsed into tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she pleaded to anyone who would listen. Travelers stopped to watch, some raising phones to capture the spectacle as if it were just another piece of entertainment in their day. The feed trembled in Marjorie's hand as she angled the camera closer. Graham tried to twist free, his voice rising above the crowd. But every attempt at defiance was crushed by the firm grip of the officers escorting him away. I looked around my apartment. Guests were pale, stunned, realizing they had been dining in the home of a man orchestrating fraud across continents. And as the FBI moved in on Mark, cuffing him under the watchful eyes of the very clients Graham had once courted, I felt the crack of truth splitting the room open. Chicago and Paris, 2 worlds that had felt impossibly separate, converged in one brutal instant. There was no denying it anymore. The performance was over. The truth had claimed the stage. The moment the FBI closed in, Mark's shoulders collapsed. His posture, so carefully trained to mimic Graham's confidence, crumbled. The accent he'd perfected for months slipped away, replaced by a raw Brooklyn edge. He raised his hands as if surrendering not only to the agents, but to the weight of the lie he had been forced to carry. "I have proof," he blurted, voice cracking. Contracts, recordings, a storage unit full of everything. He paid me to play her husband. I can show you all of it. The words detonated in the room. Clients who had been whispering in confusion now gaped openly. One of them muttered, "My God!" As the illusion shattered for good, the lead agent nodded sharply, signaling her team. Laptops and hard drives were seized, documents bagged. Then my own laptop pinged. The line of code I'd planted in that decoy investment report had done its job. The financial virus triggered. Across the screen, alerts cascaded in real time. Accounts frozen. Transactions locked. Automated notices sent directly to the SEC and the FBI's cyber unit. Every stolen cent, more than $2 million, was pinned down before it could vanish into another offshore maze. One agent leaned over my shoulder, watching the data unfold. "This is airtight," she said. For the first time in weeks, my lungs expanded fully. Relief mingled with disbelief. Outside my apartment, the story was already breaking. Phones buzzed across the room as alerts poured in. CNBC interrupted its programming with a special report. On the ticker scrolled the headline in bold, "Prominent architect falls in Paris sting. Wife exposes international fraud scheme." Wall Street Journal followed within the hour. The front page set to run. Betrayal at home, scandal in the markets. I sat at my desk later that night, the glow of my monitor illuminating the silence of a space that had once been my sanctuary and my prison. The broadcast replayed footage again and again. Graham, shackled at Charles de Gaulle, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. The man who had sworn loyalty to me, who had vowed to build a life together, had been stripped bare before the world. But the betrayal cut deeper than the affair or the missing money. He had weaponized my profession, exploited my credibility, and used my reputation as a shield for his crimes. Every client, every company whose secrets I had protected, had unknowingly been exposed because of him. Watching his downfall loop across the screen, I felt something crack open inside me. Not grief, not triumph, but a raw clarity. The man I once loved had become a headline, a cautionary tale. And I, the woman left standing in the wreckage, was no longer the silent partner in his schemes. I was the one who had pulled the thread until the entire illusion unraveled. In that final twist, the roles had reversed. The betrayer was in chains, and I, the one he thought would never see the truth, was the very person who brought his empire crashing down. The apartment by the lake was gone. I handed over the keys without looking back. The echo of the door closing behind me, like the last line of a story I no longer wanted to reread. Days later, I signed the lease on a small office tucked into a brick building in West Loop. The space smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Outside the frosted glass door hung a modest brass plaque. Langridge Consulting, protecting assets and marital integrity. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A place built not on illusions, but on truth, forged from the wreckage of what had nearly destroyed me. One morning, an envelope slid across my new desk. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, Mark Wheeler. I hesitated before opening it, the paper heavy between my fingers. 3 months of my life, it read, were spent in the worst role I ever accepted. I thought it was opportunity. It turned out to be a warning. Some parts aren't worth playing, no matter the paycheck. Thank you for not letting me stay the scapegoat forever. I folded the letter carefully, not with forgiveness, but with understanding. He had been a pawn, yes, but one who had shown me that even performances crack when confronted with truth. That evening, I met Marjorie at our old Italian spot, the one we'd gone to since we were kids. The vinyl booths hadn't changed, the checkered tablecloth still worn thin at the corners. She was already waiting in the back, a bottle of red open between 2 glasses. We raised our drinks, the clink soft but certain. "We didn't choose this tragedy," I said, the words catching in my throat. "No," she answered with a quiet smile, "but we survived it." Outside the restaurant's window, Chicago pulsed with life, cars gliding over bridges, skyscrapers glowing against the night sky. For years, I had lived caged in a marriage of shadows and betrayal. Now, as I stared at the city that had once felt like a prison, I felt the strange lightness of release. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying someone else's lies. The weight was gone, replaced by a freedom I hadn't dared imagine. And in that moment, sipping wine with my sister, while the city lights shimmered like promises, I knew this wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of a life finally my own.